session at the close of our closed session. again? I'm sorry, I took my agenda apart. Cindy, will you help orient me? I literally disassembled my agenda, and thank you. Would like to invite Mike Reberg, our Director of Community Neighborhoods, and Chief Mike Brown back up to the table. And is Fred Philpott here yet? No? Okay. Thank you.
Understood he was going to be here at 2. He's with the administration, maybe?
We had a meeting at 2 o'clock with him. He might be in the building. Fred Philpott.
Let's find him.
He said he would come here when he got here, so
Oh, okay.
I don't know why. I mean, he must be here.
I think there was we would schedule 2 o'clock with him to talk about different impact fee conversation. And so he's allegedly in the building.
Great. Okay, council members, do you have questions for these gentlemen?
Can I say something before we get started? I made a comment in the closed session about the size of the DI site. I said combined it was about an acre. It's actually larger than that. I think I was just thinking of the DI site, which was about an acre, so I apologize for that. My mistake.
And the total size is approximately?
I think I got the information, yeah.
One more update is that according to RDA staff, it's 1.8. So it grew since we were last
Oh,
texting.
there you go.
We thought it was 1.49 a minute
I
ago, but
apologize.
it's
I
1.8.
apologize for that. My bad.
Okay, 1.8. It's evolving. Council members, we're here to talk about the Sugar House Police Precinct. Do we have questions for Chief Brown or Director Reberg? Councilmember Wharton?
So, I think the council had a lot of these discussions before we came on. Can you tell me what need would the Sugar House Precinct serve that isn't being met right now?
Sure. I mean, this kind of goes back to a philosophy and how we're policing the city. When I took over as interim chief in June of 2015, we went back, and many of you will remember we had a Metro Bureau where about 100 of our officers were stationed within a very small area within the city. I went out and rode with the officers, and there was a great concern that they were going call to call to call and not having any time to spend in their beats. We reorganized the police department. We went back to a Liberty. It used to be a Pioneer and Liberty, but really it's an East Bureau and the Patrol Bureau and a West Bureau. The idea was to go back to a community-oriented policing model where our police officers were in the neighborhoods in which they served. We had everybody based out of the Pioneer Precinct. I drove some routes. It took almost 20 minutes to drive from the Pioneer Precinct if an officer was going to a call under the best of traffic circumstances, and I just arbitrarily picked 21st South and 11th East because that was where the monument was, and we just made measurements to that, but it took almost 20 minutes to get there, which I felt is not being very responsive to our community needs. And so we started talking, council, about an East Side Precinct, putting our officers back into the communities in which they serve. That was the genesis for the conversation about an East Side Precinct. Now I know Councilmember Luke has been pushing for that for many, many years under a different administration. But I think it would be very beneficial to the police department to have the officers housed in the communities in which they served, rather than the long commute to those East Side communities.
But wouldn't it be possible to deploy officers from the public safety building for the East Side? Could you do that?
Well, you know what? I drove that route yesterday, council member. It took me yesterday at 1:30 because we took half of our police officers, about 100 police officers, and put them in our new public safety building. So we do have a little more distance between the Pioneer Precinct and our downtown central public safety building. To drive from the Pioneer Precinct to the 21st South and 11th East was 17 minutes and 48 seconds. Now, you would think to go from the Public Safety Building to the very same location would be a lot quicker. It was 14 minutes 37. It's really not, it's still quite a ways from downtown to the Sugar House area.
Okay, so the need that it would be addressing is that it would just be faster response time on the east side. That's the only need.
Faster response time, more centrally located in the communities in which we serve. I mean, response time is not everything. We would like our officers to be part of the fabric of the communities in which they serve. It would be nice to have a community room up there, a walk-in desk where people could come in and get police services. But the really nice thing is a police presence is one of the things that will drive down violent crime. And with officers being located in those neighborhoods, each day you're going to see 20 or 30 officers driving through those communities to get to work and then to go back to do evidence. You're going to see a lot of police activity, which I think is healthy to drive out crime and foster the trust and the relationships that we pushed so hard to develop over the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay, so would you say that that's like secondary to the first need that we identified? Or would you say that those are equally
I
important?
think they're hand in glove.
Okay.
I do.
I have a quick follow-up, those two things, and then we're going to go to Councilmember Johnston and Councilmember Luke. Those two things that you just mentioned as hand in glove. If we were asking you today, where's the greatest need for that police presence to drive down the incidence of violent crime, as you mentioned, would you say 21st South and 11th East is the greatest area of need?
Well, if you're looking at strictly crime stats, probably not. There are some communities that haven't had the type of crime that we've seen over the last 3 years, but we've worked very hard to put those officers into those communities. And with our model of our bike officers and our strategic, our operations bureau, our special operations bureau with bikes, our narcotic officers, our street crime officers, and the CompStat model, we look at hotspots and deploy our resources based off the intelligence to help drive down that crime. But to your question, Madam Chair, is that the highest crime area in the city? No.
Councilmember Johnston?
Thanks, Chief. And having lived next to the Pioneer Police Precinct, I get the presence argument. I don't quite understand the deployment time argument, because I don't see officers between shifts coming back to the precinct. I see them being in their beats essentially during their shift. Am I wrong about that?
No, they have to come to a line up and a line down each day.
Yeah.
So at 6 a.m., the day shift officers respond for about a half-hour brief.
Yeah.
And then go out into the communities. And then when they line down in the afternoon for that day shift, they come back. And then you have an afternoon shift that overlaps, and then they come back, and then you have a graveyard shift. So they are coming in and out of those buildings.
Well, that's where I asked for the deployment time, because generally a deployment time is they're mobile somewhere in that neighborhood, they get a call, and they go from where they are to the issue, right? I mean, it's not like they have to.
Right, no, they don't go back to the station and then
Because I
wait for
think
the call.
deployment time in the fire department means a lot, because they actually are physically at the department, generally speaking, and they have to get to a certain place. But with officers, it's not necessarily the same. Is that accurate?
Right.
Okay.
But I mean, if you're responding from 1100 West and 7th South, and your beat is 144 or the beat up above Foothill, you've got 30, 40 minutes to get up there. And then if you get some evidence and you have to drive back and book that evidence, that's another commute back down to book that evidence, or charge a battery, or equipment need, or something like that. Whereas if you had a precinct up on the east side, it would the time the officers spend would be in the neighborhoods in which they're policing. It would really help that issue.
Okay, so I'm just breaking down to sort of needs, because I'm thinking about the other substations we've done on a temporary basis around the city that are rented spaces. Essentially, they're temporary. They're not doing the same things we're talking about with the precinct. Does that serve a role in parts of the city as well?
No, when you're talking substations or precincts, they're completely different.
Substations, yeah.
A substation is just a place to hang your hat, stop in, maybe do a brief, get a drink of water. A precinct is a full functioning precinct It's a mini police department that is running 24/7, 365, and staffed. A substation is not.
Councilmember Rogers? Or, I'm sorry, was it Luke? I'm
Well, I
sorry.
just actually had one question. Now, what's the impact with, if we were to build a substation, not a substation, but a police station up there? What's the impact to your budget? You have any idea?
I mean, last time we did that, I think Assistant Chief Dowd is not sitting here, but we did one of these in 2010, and I believe it was around $15 million. So it would be more than that.
Councilmember Luke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, one other question. Can you talk a little bit about the emergency response time? So, in the event of a natural disaster or an earthquake,
Sure.
Which location, and if that issue is coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, before we came over to this meeting, I went and sat down with Corey Lyman, who is the emergency manager, and looked at his map. And the faults, there is definitely a fault that runs down 11th East and 13th East from the University of Utah that transitions out through the valley. If we ever did have that earthquake that we're all preparing for, there would be a huge shift, and there would be several days before emergency roads could probably be pushed through and to access the east side. So we would have the ability to have officers on the east side of the city in a full functioning, I mean, we would build this to withstand the earthquake just like we did our public safety. But so that is one of the components that we should look at. The other is just the need to have our officers dispersed a little further east into the city. I mean, when you look at our city, it's about 5.5 miles wide, and we drove that, and it was, hang on one second. From east-west, it's 19, from north-south, it's 5.5 miles approximately, and to drive that, it takes about 11 minutes. When you start looking at east-west, it's 19 miles, and it takes about 42 minutes to traverse that. So,
Thank you for that response. And just a quick comment. During my time on the council, we've talked quite a bit about emergency preparedness and emergency management and how to deal with these issues. We had these same types of discussions when we were citing the new Sugar House fire station. There were some who were concerned that we were building the fire station on the south side of I-80. But the reality was, as a city, the department didn't have access to that. I mean, if I-80 were to have come down, we would not have had fire access on the other side of I-80. And so that was one of the justifications and one of the reasons that was used to cite that fire station there. The fault line issue is a real issue. And when we look at the population of our city and the residents and businesses who live east of 13th East, there really is not any sort of infrastructure right now to deal with that emergency management and on the police side. We have 2 fire stations. We have Fire Station 10, which is in the Research Park area, and Fire Station 13, which is in the just off of Parley's Way. But that's it. And yet we have, a fairly sizable population of our city who would be underserved in the case of an emergency situation. And that, when Corey Lyman is talking to us, he brings that up regularly.
Councilmember Fowler?
Yes, thank you, Chief. I do have a follow-up question. And I before that, I want to say a quick comment is that, I know that residents within Charlie and I's areas and districts do want to see more of a police presence and that it is very important to them. One of the things that you stated, however, I just want to get your perspective, is you said the definition of a precinct, which I appreciate because I want to make sure we all have the same definitions of what we're talking about here. Right. Is a fully running mini police department that functions 24/7. What do you think the impact of putting something like this in a residential area would be on the residents? And it's something that comes up because with the fire station, the new fire station, it's an issue that even up until its opening, we were dealing with as we had residents coming over saying, do you know how loud this is? Right, and we had to, the fire department was very good at adjusting how their intercoms work and things like that, but what would the impact of putting a precinct in a residential area be?
I think the good litmus test would be to look at the Pioneer Precinct, but the women and men in red, the fire officers, they operate a little bit different than we do. We usually like to be darked out if it's night, and we like to be quiet. Those are the two things that police officers really like. And so, Councilmember Johnston, maybe you can talk about if you've ever had complaints from neighborhoods about the police department. I know, and this is going back in history, but we tried to do this on the Garfield lot up on 15th East, and the one thing that the community at that time did not like and did not want was the fire trucks, because when they run code. They're okay with the police officers because they're quiet. So I can understand that perspective.
Mm-hmm. So you don't think it would be too much of an impact in a residential area?
No, I really don't. You would see more police cars coming and going, but other than that, I really don't see a huge impact.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I wanted to get back to a statement you made a moment ago about a sort of long ago assessment of $15 million potential, and talk about the reality of the costs of a precinct and the opportunity of impact fees. And I know Fred Philpott has joined us now. Maybe, Fred, you could come up to the table also. But just to clarify, the funding for a precinct would include a portion of impact fees, a majority of general fund, in my understanding. And I wonder if there's any chance of other funding that we could contemplate for a precinct. And then I want to mention that Councilmember Luke and I have worked together for a long time to support our police officers in their needs, including the numbers of police officers. So I want to hear about the general fund need from a proportional perspective for any precinct situation versus impact fee, and acknowledge that we've had a hard time coming up with general fund dollars to build the police force as we believe it needs to be supported, and that eventually we're talking about the same dollars here. If it's general fund money, are we building more buildings because we have impact fee money, or do we need to be investing in officers, and is it an either or? So can we talk about the proportion of funding? Fred, am I right that the majority is impact or is general fund?
Yes, based on the impact fee methodology that was utilized. It's based on what we call a fair share approach, where it looks at both existing assets and these new facilities and allocating a proportional amount based on the call volume that's anticipated within the 10-year planning horizon. So a large portion was reduced from the impact fee equation. At the time, there were some impact fee fund balance. There was an impact fee fund balance available that helped reduce the cost, and then there was about 23% call volume allocation that was basically looking at apportioning both existing facilities and the new facilities based on that 23% of estimated call volume. So the remaining would come from impact fee fund balance that you already had, and then general fund monies to make up the difference.
Okay. Director Reberg, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I did. Thank you very much. I think that very notion that you're talking about is kind of the way we've looked at the police impact fees and priorities for the city. I know we always get frustrated when we refund impact fees, and nobody likes to do that, and I don't like to do that either. But it's a tool for meeting the goals and the priorities of the city. And you're right, a lot of the costs associated with purchasing property for a police precinct and then building it is going to go to general fund obligations. And there's, as we struggle in community neighborhoods to sort of deal with all the priorities that we're trying to deal with in the city, funding our future, affordable housing, transit, perhaps a road bond. We sort of match that with all the priorities that we are, as a city, we're trying to accomplish, and also the amount of money that currently sits in the surplus land fund for the purchase of the property and how we allocate that, and sort of the pressures on that fund with other needs as well. So I think you're right to make that assessment. And that's why I think when you think about purchasing a piece of property for a police precinct, you should look at the property, absolutely the best opportunity to build a precinct. But I think you should also look at its secondary use should, for some reason, a police precinct can't be built for whatever reasons down the road. We've spent money, because that is general fund dollars we're putting into that property. And we have to make sure that if for some reason we can't build there, there's a secondary use for that property, because we've spent general fund monies as well.
Wouldn't that mean a return of the impact fee portion that may have been used for that purchase, if it isn't for police use?
I think if you decided to buy a piece of property with impact fees, and you decided down the road for some reason that you didn't want to use that for a police precinct, you can, I think there's been cases in the city where that's happened with the fire station property purchase, that you don't have to return the impact fees. You spend it for a legitimate purpose. Now, I think it might be valid to say that a portion of that money, property that you spent, should go into a police precinct down the road, but, I mean, that would be an argument, but I think we've got some legal precedent about that.
Cindy?
I guess that might be a question for executive session or for our attorney and our consultant, because it's so nuanced. And sometimes we're finding that we think the answer is one thing and it is, but with a twist. So I don't know, unless the attorney wants to give a nod and say, yes, you're sure that's correct.
Well, I don't think we're asking that question today.
Okay,
so
all right, sorry.
Let's just,
Sorry to go down that road.
yeah, let's,
I think the point is that I think being mindful of how we spend our general fund dollars is important.
Councilmember Wharton.
So I'm going back and thinking about emergencies. We heard earlier from Chief Doubt, though, that police departments can be a target for attacks. Isn't it concerning if there were to be a police department that was in the middle of a neighborhood, like the potential for a terrorist attack on that versus a natural disaster? Do you see what I mean? It seems like it's beneficial for one reason and harmful for another. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, and that's difficult because we're playing the what-if game.
Yeah.
I mean, but it has happened. Fortunately, not very often.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if there is a target, it would be the police department and not the citizens or the community in which they live. And that would be the beneficial, or that would be the upside of that.
Right, but if it's so in such close proximity, I mean, if it's a bomb or something.
Yeah, but I mean, with that reasoning, then we should probably find a large parcel of land out west and build a big warehouse that has a huge offset, and we can watch, I mean, I know what you're saying, but sometimes you can't live in fear, you can't police in fear. You have to be a part of the community. You have to reinforce and build those trust, and we've worked very hard in the last 3 years to do that. But I do respect that opinion.
Okay.
I think we should just be very mindful how we lay these out and how we build them.
Okay, and second of all, I'm talking about the advantage of having a precinct that would be in a safer area for natural disaster reasons. I mean, I still don't really know what a precinct does. Are there officers that are going to be there, like during the day, that would kind of hang out there in the event that there was an emergency, like a fire station? Or are these officers already going to be out in the community patrolling and doing their
Just to give you a quick rundown of what the
Okay.
Pioneer Precinct and how it's staffed. Captain Farias is in charge of the Pioneer Precinct. He has an executive lieutenant. There are usually 2 or 3 shifts of officers with a sergeant and a cadre of officers that work for them. They're there for a day shift. They're there for an overlapping afternoon and then graveyard shift. A lot of times they'll go to that place to have their lunch, to work out. It's kind of their home away from home. But in this precinct, we would build an evidence locker. Like right now, if you're out on a call and you collect evidence, you can drive to the PSB, you can book your evidence and put it in a locker. If you're up on the east bench and you go on a call and there's evidence, you're going to drive all the way down to the public safety building to do that. So if we had a more centrally located precinct up there, the travel time would be considerably less, because if you're looking at the best time commute from, say, the 21st and 11th East is 18 minutes down to the PSB, and then you do the work you need to do and then go back, you're looking probably well over an hour before you get back to the community in which you serve. If you have something that's, say, a little further east, the centralized hub would be in the neighborhood, and you would still have a presence driving through those neighborhoods and in all aspects of police work, going to work, evidence, working out, all those different things.
What about from the natural disaster scenario, though?
From a natural disaster, I mean, there is default, and that is a consideration, but I think that's just one item to consider. I think the course and how we do business and how we serve the community probably would outweigh that, but I think we need to be cognizant of that too. So if we could have our cake and eat it too.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair? I think in my experience with the Pioneer Precinct, there's a lot of activity around changes, around the different shift changes, so to speak. But I don't think if you're thinking about sort of police officers just hanging out there at the desk and coming in and talking to them, it doesn't happen that way, generally speaking, at the Pioneer at least. I mean, there are times when that's true, there's somebody at the desk, but I think more often than not, we have to call into to dispatch and then get somebody out there if we want to do some things like that. So I think there's a question in my head about, are we talking about a neighborhood where the public would expect to walk in during at least daytime hours or other times and find an officer there who they could just speak with? Because that's
Yes, I mean, we do. We have the front desk staffed at the Pioneer Precinct from, say, 8 to 5 or 8 to 6, where if they walk in, they can file a complaint, they can get the help at that front desk. The same is true at the Public Safety Building.
Yeah, I
And we
think my
would-
experience has been a little different though over there at Pioneer. You may have some posted hours, but more often than not, that's not there. That's why I'm trying to clarify that. Is the intention to have a 20 or say an 8-hour day physical presence at a desk at
Yeah,
a precinct?
that
the intention?
would be our goal.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'll check into that for you.
Okay.
Council members, other questions? This is our only item on our work session. Sure, please, Councilmember Fowler.
How big is the public safety building over here? Like how much?
Big. I'm sorry.
What's the acreage? Like what's the land that it
You
sits
know
on,
what?
do you
I wish
It's
the
just like a
assistant-
block.
Yeah.
Right,
I wish I had. I can get that to you.
Okay. And then how big is the Pioneer Park precinct?
The Pioneer Precinct is about 38,000 square feet, and it sits on approximately 4 acres.
Okay.
But there was a shell of a building that we retrofitted to be a police department, and so the offsets from the street, and there is a lot of, on the east side, there's a lot of grass, and there's a kind of an area where we can have different ceremonies. We hold our night out against crime out there, so
Okay.
we wouldn't need that extra footage.
Thank you.
What do you have there? 163,000
167,000 for just police.
for just police over here at the Public Safety Building.
We actually got this question yesterday, so we pulled up on the assessor, and the square footage is that, but the acreage is about 4 acres for the parcel that the building sits on. It does include an easement that sort of stretches up to Blair Street. That adds about another 0.5 acres, but, so.
Okay, council members, anything else? All right, then that is going to conclude our work session. Our standing items, we don't have any report and announcements, no report from the chair and vice chair. And just like that, we're seamlessly going to move into our formal meeting. So you may be excused.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, council.
Thank you.
We don't have any public hearings, potential action items, or comments to the council. We have one item of new business, which is a resolution to retain police impact fees. I'm looking for a motion. And folks, I don't think, council members, I don't think it's in our printed packet. It's,
Is it on its way? Okay, hold on.
let's just wait a moment till everybody can pull it up.
When was it sent electronically? Oh,
It's in the Dropbox.
it's from Bridget.
From Priscilla. Charlie's just going to read it.
I move that we approve that the council approve a resolution identifying an extraordinary and compelling reason to hold the $212,789 of police impact fees and identifying a date to expend the fees.
Is there a second? I have a motion by Councilmember Luke, a second by Councilmember Rogers. I'm going to roll call it. Councilmember Rogers? Yes. Luke? Yes. Fowler? Wharton? Kitchen?
No.
Johnston?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So with that, we've approved that resolution. We have no items of unfinished business. We do have one item on the consent agenda, which is setting the date for a public hearing on the budget amendment number 2. Can I get a motion to approve?
What are we approving? To schedule?
In a minute. The consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion to approve the consent agenda by Councilmember Fowler, second by Councilmember Johnston. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And the consent agenda is approved. Yes, Director Reberg, you will be our one item of clarification or question.
Thank you so much. With your passage of that motion, is that an indication that you want us to move forward with pursuing the property on 21st and 21st?
Yeah.
I thought that was self-explanatory.
With that, we're going to adjourn the meeting.